Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, July 3rd, 2008. I'm James Spencer.
I'm Steve Wilkes.
Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. But this week, Steve's joined me for our coverage of the National Homebrewers Conference in Cincinnati. We continue our coverage with part one of a wrap-up of some of the sessions that we saw. And today, Steve and I will take you through some interviews that we did with experts that we grabbed at the conference.
Oh, we didn't actually grab them.
Well, we didn't. We grabbed the interviews. We didn't grab the experts.
Kind of scared me there for a minute.
Thank you for clarifying. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And you can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. And Steve, what is your?
Mine is Braggot, all one word. And that's B-R-A-G-G-O-T.
Right, not Braggart.
Yeah, not Braggart.
Braggart.
That's my other Twitter site.
And before we get into, I want to mention that Celebrator Beer News is a magazine that I get that's produced by Tom Daldorf, and they have a video. An online video now. It's on their website now, and Tom says that they're going to make it into a podcast, but they're doing a weekly news-style video on Celebrator.com that is talking about the beer world. So I just recently hooked into that, and it's a cool little thing. And whenever I stumble across cool things, I want to in this realm, I'd like to pass it on to you guys. So check out Tom Daldorf's video news thingy, online news thingy on Celebrator.
Is that a technical term?
That's right. That's an industry term. Video news thingy.
We'll do it live.
We'll do it live. Well, Steve, I talked a little bit about the conference last week, but we've had time to digest. We've had time to think about it. What are your impressions of the American Homebrewers Conference in Cincinnati?
I think that what struck me the most was the friendliness and the camaraderie of all the folks that we ran into. Mm-hmm. Just a great opportunity to put a face with names and to just see what everybody's doing around the country with all the great beers. I'm just always struck at the creativity of the homebrewing community and the vitality of the folks that the vitality they bring to the hobby. And people from every walk of life that you can imagine. It just really stunning.
Yeah, I think if there was one thing that I can say over the others that we've been to, this is our third. Sure, there's great people there, great technical advice, excellent beers to try, and inspiring beers. But the thing that got me this time more than the other times is the number of people that came up to us.
Oh, yeah.
And said, hey, just want to say howdy and, shake your hand and, thanks for doing what you're doing. And I think you're a little bit like me in that I'm basically an introvert. So when I go to a large gathering like that,
right,
or I go to even a party at somebody's house, I'm off in the corner, usually near the beer.
Yeah.
But but off in a corner, me and my wife and maybe, just my close friends or people that I already know. But it was really nice for people to come up to us mm-hmm. and introduce themselves and start conversations. And it was really interesting to hear where everybody was from, what they're brewing. And it was just really fun to touch base with people in real life.
Yeah.
So thanks to everybody who came up and said howdy to us. It was a wonderful experience.
Mm-hmm. It sure was.
It was also great to hang out with Jeff Bear and his family. Jeff Bear from Craft Beer Radio. And we got to hang out a bit with Craig Ballinger from Brew Bubba's.
The Brew Bubba's. The Bubba's.
And, of course, being on the Good Beer Show, which we haven't heard yet.
No, we haven't.
I haven't seen that out there yet. I don't know I hope there's not an issue.
Boy, that was a good time. That was a good time tenfold.
I might have had a little too good of a time. I don't know.
Maybe.
But anyway, take a listen to that on the Good Beer Show. But let's get into some of the stuff that we heard there at the conference. First of all, The first interview that we have is we were hanging out at the hospitality suite for a bit, and I heard my name. Somebody said my name. I looked up, and it was Dave Wills from Fresh Hops.
A very wonderful gentleman who knows a lot about hops.
That's right, and you've heard Dave Wills on this show, but I'd never met him in person, and it was nice to talk to him in person, and I took the opportunity to ask him about how hop rhizome sales are going, and selfishly, I had asked about my hops in particular.
Well, they're your babies.
Well, Dave Wills, it's good to meet you in person after talking to you on the phone and corresponding with you on email and such. I'm glad you flagged me down.
Well, howdy, Jim. Good to meet you too as well.
You were talking about your hop rhizome situation. I guess this year's been a pretty good year for hop rhizomes, huh?
Yeah, that's for sure. With the hop shortage, everybody and the brother is now going to grow their own, and so I anticipated an increase in sales, and it certainly resulted in an increase in sales. We were hopping night and day for all spring.
What kind of an increase are we talking about here, percentage-wise?
I think we were up about 400% over last year. That was we were super busy.
So are you seeing orders from all around the country, or is it just regions that you would suspect would be good for growing hops?
I'm getting interest from all around the world. Yeah, we were sending them to South Korea and Zimbabwe and Japan, and I don't do certain countries I can't send to at all due to quarantine issues, especially like New Zealand and Australia, where they have a hop industry, but they don't want to import. They don't have many of the hop diseases and pests that we have in the United States, so they don't want to take any chances by bringing over any rhizomes that may or may not have a mildew on them or something like that. So I can't. You can send them there, but they have to go through a long quarantine procedure that nobody seems to want to put up with. So we don't really go there, and I don't really go to Europe either because there's just restrictions on just trying to just get them in the mail. You're not even supposed to mail certain plants to Europe. But some countries we go to, but across the United States, I'm seeing interest from certainly all over the United States. And some states are certainly going to do better than others. But I'm surprised to hear that yours are doing so well down in Arkansas. Well, that's great.
As we were saying, some of them my Cascades are doing really well. I'm kind of disappointed with some of the other varieties, and you were trying to help me diagnose my problem long distance, and I know that's tough to do. But do you find that like in the southern states, some varieties are going to do much better than the others, no matter how much you baby them?
Yep, that's going to be the case. The vigorous varieties that we have in the Northwest are going to, all the reports I'm getting from all across the U.S. is that they seem to be also do well everywhere, whereas the weaker varieties are going to be the weak varieties. And it's just, you're not going to see Hallertauer out yield a Cascade or Chinook or Nugget or something like that just because you're growing it in a different state. That's just doesn't seem to be the case.
What are the varieties that you're seeing are most popular, that people are most seeking?
Cascade's number one by far. That was far and away my number one seller, and that's good because it is a very popular brewing hop and also very vigorous and grows well. So I'm glad that it grows well because it is so popular. The next ones that do really well seem to be Nugget and Chinook and Magnum. Those seem to do real well. Then there's a whole bunch that kind of are mediocre and some that are pretty poor, no matter where you grow them. On my website, it kind of lists which ones are vigorous versus medium vigor, and so it's you can look on freshhops.com and see what might do the best for you.
Yeah, that's an excellent resource. Got lots of stuff to lots of guidelines on growing the hops and photographs of people's hop yards and such as that.
Yeah, we keep adding to it all the time. We're adding some nice videos here in the very near future.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, with the new streaming type of stuff, video stuff that it's not really streaming, but we're just adding some videos that'll show a little bit more of the commercial production aspect, and a cool thing called History of Hop Growing in the Willamette Valley that goes back to about the 1910 or 20s, that shows how it was done back then.
Are you still doing the Hop Madness?
Hop Madness is on the books for August 30th at Willamette Mission State Park. It's a good time. It's a good party. We're going to be, of course, bringing in the green hops. That'll be harvesting, of course, at that time, and people will be picking green hops and making fresh harvest ales at the park. And then we, of course, go to this farm that's about a mile down the road and get to experience the whole picking and drying and baling operation and walk through the fields. And this is going to be about the 6th or 7th year, so it's a great opportunity to see how the big boys do it.
And people can find out more about that at hopmadness.com.
Yeah.
Well, maybe one day we'll make it up there.
Please do.
Well, again, it's good to meet you in person. I'm glad you snagged me.
Right on. Thanks, Jim.
Excellent.
So again, that was excellent to talk to Dave Wills from Fresh Hops. And Steve, I guess that's one of the benefits of going to the National Homebrewers Conference is you get to kind of, buttonhole these experts
Absolutely.
in person and ask them the questions that you've been wanting to ask them.
Yeah, no kidding. You don't have to go ask your neighbor or something. I'm thinking about these hops. You think they'll grow? Go ask the guys that know what they're talking about. And yeah.
And they're there to talk about beer. They're there to talk about the ingredients for beer, and they're glad to spend some time with you. So thanks again to Dave Wills for taking time out to talk to us. And speaking of hops, a couple days ago, I climbed the ladder and picked my Cascade hops because they were getting a little crispy around the edges, some of them, and wound up picking 2 pounds, 11 ounces of wet hops. Now, of course, they won't weigh that much when they dry, but you got to see them.
They're beautiful. They're just gorgeous. I couldn't believe it. And the little, what do you call that? An oast? What was that? What was that? I don't know from an oast. It looked like a couple of screen doors to me. But you had them drying in a guest bedroom, which I wondered how your wife felt about that.
Well, it only takes a few days, like 3 days for them to dry. So, it's a temporary thing.
Well, if Aunt Edna shows up, you'll just have to put her out in the barn.
That's right. Yeah, my low-tech hop drying device is some cardboard boxes with some window screens stacked across them, and with the hops just spread out in one layer on top of those. And I mentioned it on the show before. What I do is they're in the guest bedroom. What I do is I shut the door and I turn off the air conditioner vent, and it's probably 81, 82 degrees Fahrenheit in there. Mm-hmm. But still drier than outside because it is, inside the house, and the hops dry out just fine.
So it's the LTO, the low-tech oast. We'll be doing a DVD on that soon.
Be a very short one.
Very short one.
Well, speaking of hops, to do a segue, the first session that we went to on Thursday was from Michael Ferguson of BJ's. It was hop substitution. How do we make the beers we want in this crazy hop market?
Yeah.
So, he had some excellent advice in that presentation.
Let's see what he's got to say.
Indeed, I'm Michael James Barton Ferguson. My nickname in the industry is Mufasa. I work for BJ's Restaurants, Inc. as the Director of Brewery Operations, Contract Brewing, and Beer Training.
Now, the first part of your presentation was a bit doom and gloom, wouldn't you say?
Yes, but you know what? I always feel, and it's almost like when you're on a campaign stomp, you have to start with the doom and gloom because you need to show people the brighter side of what's going on.
So in a nutshell, how bad is it?
It's as bad as it gets. This is as bad as it gets. This is probably as bad as the hop blight that hit us in the late 1800s that knocked out so many of the areas in the country. In 1860, we had 400% more hop acreage than we do now. Yes, this is how it's been going, because as the higher alphas come in and the higher yield hops come in, the ones that give you more hops per acre and more alpha per acre, the aroma varieties and those other ones have been going away, and the flavor varieties have been going away, and you know, because of the big three, soon to be the big two, because of their practices in Heineken and Brahma and Modelo, because of the way they hop their beers. High alpha is the only thing they do. They don't do flavor, they don't do aroma, so you know. For us, that is doom and gloom because those varieties are going away, and we have fallen so head over heels with Cascades that their scarcity is really going to cause us some uncomfortability. So you know.
But you did have some practical tips. I mean, first of all, how do you get your hands on the scarce hops that are out there? What are some tips that you can give us to procure the hops that we actually need to brew those beers that we love?
Okay, your best bet is to hit up the brewers that have too many of the style hops that we need. And there's a couple of places that have done this. I was just talking to some guys in there that they went up to Colorado and were able to get the brewer had 140 pounds overstock. All right, of Cascades, and they were able to buy those from them. Okay, so these are different things. A lot of these brewers can't store them very well, and if they get new crops in and things like that, so they have to change out in the freezers that they're doing. So talk to your local brewers. Talk to those people. They're ones that can really, get you the information that you need. The other thing is, buy online. You're gonna pay for it, but you'll be able to get them in a lot of places, at least for a while. All right, but you're going to pay a premium. That stuff that was costing 80 cents an ounce is costing you $4 an ounce now. So you're going to pay a premium for it. But that's in keeping with what the pro brewers have to pay for theirs now too.
And you're also talking about if you are a member of a homebrewing club, or if you can kind of pool resources amongst other homebrewers, maybe you can trade and kind of get the hops that you need.
The trading and bartering thing is something that I've always done as long as I've been a brewer, and if you pool your resources, you could actually decide what beers you're going to make and what beers they're going to make, and then you could share and trade and barter with those beers. So let's say that you're the guy that in the club that makes the best IPA. Well, then maybe you should be the guy making the IPA and not the guy making the brown ale. You should leave that up to the brown ale guy that does it. So pool your resources, and that way the club can say, okay, you're making the IPA. Here are the hops you need to make the IPA. You get to make the IPA. You share it with the club. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
Now, once you get your hands on the hops, how do you treat them so that they're preserved for the future?
And that's a huge thing. A lot of people don't know how to store hops. If you got whole leaf hops, your best bet is to vacuum seal them and refrigerate them. If you get pellets, which I prefer, the reason I prefer pellets is, one, pellets utilize more of the lupulin glands because it crushes them very good, so they're much more efficient, and they store a lot better because you could freeze them without turning the leaves brown and stuff like this. Okay, so one of the things you want to do is if you don't have a vacuum sealer, because a vacuum sealer is really cool, but if you don't have a vacuum sealer, you want to use some sort of inert gas. You want to use something like nitrogen or even CO2 would work, but nitrogen is really better. And then you want to fill the bag with that a couple of times just so you can eliminate the air that's in there, squeeze the air out, fill it with nitrogen, squeeze the air out, fill it with nitrogen, and then when you get a good place, squeeze as much of that out as you can, seal it, put it in another bag, and then store it in a non-frost-free freezer. Now, if you have a frost-free freezer, and most of us do, then you're going to want to take that bag and you want to put it in another bag of ice. All right, and because frost-free freezers go through this temperature change, which puts stress on the hops. So it thaws and then freezes and then thaws and then freezes, and this puts stress on the hops, which will actually age your hops faster. All right, so you want to keep that temperature constant by putting it with ice around it. That keeps that temperature change from happening. So that's another good way to do it. But vacuum seal it, stick it in ice, put it in a frost-free, or if you have a non-frost-free, especially a sub-zero non-frost-free. Those are really great, and that's what I used when I was in the last time I was at my own place. So
now there are some things that we can do to more smartly utilize our hops in the process, in the brewing process?
Yeah, there's a number of things. First of all, use your hops in the right place. You guys that are using mash hops, that could stop. I mean, that was a little fad about 3 years ago. I don't know how many people are still using it. Some people were really behind it and wanted to keep doing it. I'd say don't do it. The other thing is, when you're bittering, using bittering hops, of course, you're going to use high alphas. Don't use your aromas and don't use your flavors in the bittering. A lot of people do. A lot of people, they're using Chinooks or Columbus in the beginning. They'll put their Cascades there, too, as well as at the end. No need. It's going to be a 90-minute boil. You're not going to get any flavor. You're not going to get any aroma from that. Do that. And like I said, it's 90-minute boil. So start boiling your beers a little bit longer. Get that extra 2%. So if you boil for an hour, you get 21% efficiency. If you boil for an hour and a half, you get 23.5% efficiency. All right. So that's going to give you a little bit more, and that comes in handy. I am not a proponent of boiling over 90 minutes. I think that it causes some bizarre flavors. However, if you're making something like a barley wine, or if you're making something like an imperial something or other that's going to have high gravity and a high residual gravity when you're done, then you could probably get away with boiling over 90 minutes.
And you probably for the bittering hops, you probably want to use pellets as opposed to whole hops, right? To
absolutely.
Get the extra bittering power.
You definitely want to use the pellets, so you get much more efficiency out of the pellets than the whole hops. And I understand that there's some people that just like using the whole hops, but they get in the way. they're bulky, and they lower the efficiency really of your kettle. Boiling. So really what you need to do, I would suggest to people that they use the pelletized hops, yes.
And after all this is said and done, if you can't get the good hops, or the hops that you're used to, if you maybe can't get the freshest hops, if you can't get the best hops that you can get, all is still not lost, right?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, there are hop varieties out there that we just don't know about, that a lot of us don't deal with, because basically, if you look at the chart of hop growing around the country, 70% of that is 7 varieties. All right. 29% of that is like 150 varieties of hops. So there's like all these hops out there. They're offshoots. They're husbanded from a different line. There's all these different things. But you'll find that there's some overstock of hops that you've never heard of. Things like Opal, Palisades, and Glacier and stuff like that. Those hops are still out there. We just don't use them often because we got used to what we were doing. But that's the whole point of home brewing. Why get used to what you're doing? The whole idea when we started this whole thing was that you guys wanted to make beer, that wasn't there, that you couldn't get anymore. I mean, where could you get a Vienna? They didn't make it in Vienna for the last 100 years. So I mean, you wanted to make these beers that weren't out there. So let's do that again. I think this shortage is actually good for the market. I think it's going to stir things up. I think it's going to kick brewers, home brewers and pro brewers alike into making different things and getting us out of this whole rut that we've been in. So
here in a couple of years, we may see some new styles arrive from all this?
Absolutely. I'm hoping that's the case. I'm hoping that there's going to be there'll be so many beers in experimental categories, that they're going to have to start creating styles for a lot of these beers. There's going to be an American Pale Ale Prime or Sub 1 or Sub 2. I mean, there's going to be a different sort of variety of American Pale Ales coming out. There has to be. I mean, we certainly can't continue with the Cascade thing, and I know that people had fallen in love with Simcoe and Amarillo, but even those are a little scarce. So we're going to have to start using different things. And I Opal is not a bad aroma and flavor hop to use. So, you might consider that one and go out there and look for it. You probably could still get it for a good price.
Excellent. Thanks for your time.
No, the pleasure was mine indeed. Thank you so much.
So I guess the bottom line from Michael Ferguson is that it is a critical situation in that there are remarkably low numbers of hops available, but it's not the end of the world.
No, not by any means. And I think it's an opportunity to be creative and to just go with the flow. Unless you're brewing competitively and trying to nail a particular style that really, really takes a particular hop, it's not the end of the world. You can make great beers that are, pretty close to the style guidelines if that's, what you're trying to do, but may not be right on the nail, but so what? It's good beer, and as long as it's good beer, that's what counts.
That's right. And I think that coming out of the end of this, we're going to come up with some new styles that we haven't seen before. And through exercising, through our creativity through this crisis, we're going to come up with better beers in the end.
That's right.
Which doesn't mean that when we come to the other side, we won't go back to making huge hoppy Cascade IPAs.
Right. Yeah.
But we will have more beers in our repertoire, so to speak, so that we'll be better brewers at the end of it. So
sure.
Don't fear. The other presentation that we went to on Thursday was from Chris White of White Labs, and the title of the presentation was Optimize Your High-Gravity Fermentations. So when you have the founder of a yeast company there, again, you want to ask them questions that you want to ask about your brewing, and so I think that we took that opportunity with Chris.
Yeah.
Well, Chris White, thanks for talking to us.
Oh, it was fun, yeah. Full house.
Yeah, I enjoyed your presentation. You're talking about big beers, or high-gravity beers, but I thought it was interesting, or we thought it was interesting, our ears perked up when you talked about experimenting with 2-liter batches.
Yes.
We've been playing with doing test batches with 3/4 of a gallon, just making a 6-pack at a time,
right,
and having a lot of fun with it. And it was interesting to hear you talk about making really small batches, even to replicate, full-scale commercial beers.
Yeah, I wanted to even make smaller sizes. I want to make half-liter, 1-liter sizes, and because the smaller sizes you can make, the more variables you can change. The easier it is on a benchtop to change a lot of stuff. But we could never really get the 1-liter or the smaller sizes to replicate the commercial beers we were trying to replicate. 2-liter, that's the reason we ended up with 2-liter, because in our system, with our bottles we were using and our temperature control, that's the size we found that we could replicate the commercial beers.
Is it just a mathematical problem if you start off with 2 liters or 5 gallons or whatever, and you need to build that up to 10 barrels?
Yeah.
Is it just a math problem, or does...
No, I think it's a biological problem that is so many variables it's hard to compute, or to even predict.
Yeah.
So, because we're basically trying to do the same thing at 2 liters as we would at 20 liters, 5-gallon batch,
right,
or at a 100-barrel batch.
Right.
We're trying to do the same pitching rate, same fermentation temperature. We're actually using wort from a local brewery, so we have a standardized wort we use too. So it's coming off of a big system. But then we can take that wort, we can ferment it separately in 2 liters and take the beers and then compare the beers afterwards that are packaged, and they are the same. That was kind of our model for coming up to make this method, this trial fermentation method.
Yeah, because a lot of the feedback that we get, some of it's positive in that, gosh, I didn't know you could make a beer so small. But on the other hand, a lot of people are saying, why take all that time to make such a small beer? Why don't I just make a big batch of beer?
Right. Yeah, because if you're doing it, if you guys are making the wort too, it might say, well, it's the same amount of work to make 2 liters of wort versus 20 liters. And that's the same thing almost on the commercial side. It's the same to make, 5 barrels as it is 50 barrels.
But it takes a lot less time to bring a gallon and a quart up to a boil, and it takes very little time to bring 3 quarts down to pitching temperature. So
yeah. I think that's good. And unless you have a big way of drinking a lot of beer that comes out of your, 5 gallons of beer is still a lot of beer. And if you make another one the next week, now you've got 10 gallons. And then the next week, it's too much beer for me to have around, because
especially if you don't make it right.
Yeah. If you're having to dump it, that's a lot to dump. And then you're also buying commercial beers. Probably most homebrewers are still, because we like microbrewed beers. So the fridge gets pretty full, right, fast.
Yeah. So if I'm a home brewer, I'm making 5 gallons of beer. What's the single thing I can do to best use my yeast? And so make a starter, control my temperature, pitch at a certain temperature, aerate. What's the one thing that would really improve my beer?
I think aeration. Temperature. It's a tough one between temperature and aeration, but those two have a lot of more impact than what a lot of people are kind of trying to do with the yeast.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you make a starter or not, sometimes doesn't really have an impact on the final flavor of the beer. But fermentation temperature, really getting it dialed in to hold 68, for example, or 55, and make sure you're close to that 10 ppm dissolved oxygen levels. Those two things have such an impact on the actual beer flavor that I think those are the most important things. And aeration, if you had to pick one of them, would be the one I would look at, because that's the one that people get into fermentation problems with sometimes, because they can say you just shake and you're at 2 ppm, and that you may make 99 great beers that way, and then you make one that didn't turn out very good because that 2 ppm is sort of on the borderline for yeast even functioning well, and then you use some yeast that was not very healthy, and you had a problem, and you think you start going, okay, what was the problem there? And it turns out, well, if you had aerated more, the yeast might have revigorated them enough to carry out the fermentation okay.
That's very interesting. I had a beer, I don't know, about a year ago now, really, but that I couldn't figure out why this had this little cardboardy. It just never really went where I thought it was supposed to go. And I wondered, because I shake. I'm a shaker.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if it didn't shake right for me that day, and that yeast and that batch didn't turn out. So this is very, very interesting to me. I also had a question for you about the length of time that you can leave your beer on the yeast. Okay, so I've made 5 gallons of beer, and I'm excited about this beer, but I'm really busy. I can't get to it. It's done with fermentation. And how long can I leave it on there before I begin to get off flavors from the yeast?
With a 5-gallon batch, sometimes it can be a month before you start seeing flavor problems. But if the yeast is not very healthy, say even at the beginning of fermentation, then it may be 2 weeks. But in a commercial brewing setting, it may be 2 days longer, because you've got this huge head pressure from the yeast, from the beer sitting on top of the yeast. It could be, a couple thousand liters or more. But in home brewing, where we're 20 liters, you don't see the autolysis flavors usually coming in, like I said, sometimes over a month. But if the yeast is in poor health, then that would be one of those other cases where 99 times you do it that way and store it for a month, and then one time it has the cardboard flavors because the yeast was in bad health. So it is better really to remove it after about 2 days.
Okay. Yeah. So go ahead and get it off of there.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, you were talking about high gravity beers. What is your definition of a high gravity beer, and why are high gravity beers so stressful for the yeast?
Well, I'd say anything over 1060 specific gravity starts to become stressful for yeast, and then the industry kind of labels anything over 1080 as really high gravity brewing. But it used to be 1060. Now they've kind of raised that to 1080 because a lot of brewers are doing around 1060 now. And it's more stressful because there's more osmotic pressure on the yeast from the higher sugar level, and you get less dissolved oxygen into high gravity wort. They make higher alcohol at the end, which also puts a lot of pressure on the yeast. Sometimes these high gravity beers can have higher percentage of darker malts, which also leads to fermentation problems with yeast. So kind of a lot of factors, but the main things are the osmotic pressure and the alcohol content that gets created.
Now, you mentioned kind of a triad of things that you can do to help. There's pitching rate, temperature, and aeration. On the pitching rate, is there such thing as too much of a good thing? Can you overpitch?
Yes. Yeah, and we saw when we started to get it up to, say, 40 million cells per mil, you actually had higher levels of fusel alcohols. And they probably, because they're starting so quickly.
So are you getting higher fusel alcohols when you're pitching more yeast?
Yes. Well, at the very high levels, say 40, 50 million cells per mil. And it also, because the yeast are not as healthy, they're maybe leaking more of those compounds out into the beer. Because if you add more yeast, you create less new yeast. Because if you add 10 million per mil, they grow to 50 million per mil. That's a 5-fold growth. If you add 30 million per mil and they might only grow to 50 million per mil, so maybe 1.5-fold growth. So there's less new cells there. So the other population is getting older faster and dying.
Is that because of a lack of nutrient for the cells, or like rats in a cage? Is it just they're just too confined? I don't.
They're
quite
too
understand.
confined. They need to go into a bigger volume. Okay. There's only so much carbohydrate and nutrients there for them. Yeah. And if we were able to pump in some oxygen, they would grow more. But in the beer fermentations, we keep the oxygen out. Right. We force them to do their work without oxygen, and so they grow a lot less.
Because we want alcohol, we don't want more cells.
Yeah.
What about aeration? I mean, if I've got my oxygen pump and my aeration stone, at the beginning of fermentation, you talked about up to 2 minutes using the stone. Is there such a thing as too much oxygen?
I don't think so, because it's hard to get over. Like, for example, if we kept aerating instead of 2 minutes, if we did 5 minutes, you'll still see your around 15 ppm, because it's hard to saturate. 10 is sort of saturation, but it's temperature dependent and head pressure dependent. So you can see some fluctuation between 10 and 20, but it's pretty hard to get over 20 ppm. It just comes out into the air.
And then you were talking about if you have a really high gravity wort, if you like 1100 or more, if you want to have sort of an insurance policy, after 12 hours or so, you can hit it with another hit of oxygen.
Right. Yeah, give it a little bit more oxygen. And it seems to be something that's becoming more popular because the yeast has gone through some divisions. You give them some oxygen, perhaps that's going to help them get the more divisions they need to finish out the beer. But I've never seen any real data on it, but it's something that some homebrewers are talking about doing, and I've recommended some homebrewers to do, and they like the results. They seem to have better fermentations if they give it another minute or 2 minutes of oxygen at 10 or 12 hours.
Now, I'm going to throw you a curve here, and you know, if you don't want to comment or if you want to defer, feel free to. But we've done an experiment, and our experiment was to test 3 different base malts.
Okay.
And so we made 3 small batches of beer, but we left the hops out. And for the ease of use, we used a dry yeast to ferment those beers. And the beers that we got without the hops were sour. So then we came back and did another experiment and added a bit of hops in one and no hops in the other. No hops was sour, and the one with hops was not, with the dry yeast. Now, my next step, I've got some of your yeast, the California ale yeast, at home. Do you have any predictions as to, your yeast without hops and your yeast with hops?
Yeah. Well, we make a lot of beer without hops at White Labs with our yeast, and it doesn't taste sour. So I would expect it not to taste sour. So if it's sourness, just because, maybe it tastes sour because it doesn't have hops in it, but if it is sourness, say from acid produced by bacteria, then that wouldn't be too surprising, because you can plate any dry yeast out there and you'll have bacteria. It's not a slam on the dry yeast or anything like that. It's just a fact. All dry yeast has pretty high numbers of bacteria and some wild yeast in it. And they vary a little bit. But one of the claims is that it's okay, there's some aerobic bacteria there, but it's kind of okay because it's going to die off in a fermentation. Yeah. And about 15 IBUs of hops is all it takes. Yeah. And so if you don't hop it, maybe some of that aerobic bacteria is able to express because it's not being inhibited by the hops, and it's able to get some more growth. And so then if that's the case, then if you used ours, you wouldn't see that same sourness.
So you guarantee a pure yeast.
Right. And that's one of the things you can do with liquid strains. You still takes a lot of work to get them pure and to keep them pure, but it's really hard to take them and dry them through a lot of air and equipment and keep that bacteria out.
Yeah. Even though we've had excellent success with this brand of dry yeast in making beers, making big beers, making small beers, but they've all got hops in them and they're all beers.
That's really interesting. I've never heard of anybody doing that study. So
we have a lot of time on our hands, I guess. Well, we appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Very good information from Chris White, and it'll be interesting if his predictions, when I get around to doing the third or fourth round of the base malt experiment for the video podcast, whether his prediction will come true, and that if we just use his yeast, whether we'll get sourness without hops or not.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see in the new season. Get ready for sweeps.
And then there's a reason that you asked him specifically about how long to leave beer on the yeast.
Yeah, because I've got 5 gallons of Amarillo ale sitting on a yeast cake right now that I was getting a little worried about. But he assured me it would be okay.
So again, using this medium for our own benefit. That's what
it's very selfish reasons that I get into
all
this.
About. We'll use this show to better our beers, and if you can get some information from it, so much the better.
Yeah. You're on your own after that.
Well, that's all for the interviews for this time. Next time, we're going to talk about English home brewing, brewing with Brettanomyces.
I just love him.
I've got his second album.
You got a second album?
The Perfect Draft Pint with the Ray Daniels, and Fruit and Spice and Mead. So lots of stuff coming next time. We will see you then, and thanks, Steve, for joining me.
Well, thanks, James. I'm glad I could get over here this afternoon.
If you have brewing questions, not you, but them.
Well, I have some too.
Well, you can write me too.
Okay, I will.
If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from, and check out our video podcasts from the conference.
Oh, yeah.
And if you have a slow download, if you're still on dial-up, you might check the website itself at basicbrewingvideo.com. We've got a streaming version of those videos that with Flash that doesn't take so long to download. But you can also, while you're on our site, check out our low-tech lagering and decoction mashing DVD, where you can see Steve do a single-step decoction mash and follow me through a lager fermentation in the middle of summer where I don't use a dedicated chest freezer. And we have a testimonial that I almost put on the podcast from a brewer from New Jersey who was like, Steve, I didn't know how to do a decoction, and I watched you do the decoction of the DVD, and you walked me through it step by step. And so, yeah, we might use that somewhere else. There are also original DVDs in Basic Brewing Introduction to Extract Home Brewing. We walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process from milling your grain to collecting your wort. We got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time.
Can I get fries with that?
Only
with a combo with cheese?
Yes, exactly. Cheesy fries.
Cheesy fries. Cheese curds.
Yes. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country.
Am I making this difficult?
Yes, you are. The growing list of fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. We've got shirts and hats. And also, this is the fun part for me. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Fundamentals of Geophysics.
Oh, my.
Yeah. See, smart people listen to the show. And Weber 87886 Chimney Starter.
Well, and people that like fire listen to this show.
Fans of fire and geophysics. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, we can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We appreciate your support. And there's also a Kindle link on there. Nobody's bought a Kindle, but there's a link if you know what the Kindle is?
I don't know what
it's a little book reader thing where you can download electronic books and read them on that little machine.
I thought that was a Kevin.
Kindle.
No, Kindle.
That's what you put on the fire. That's what you put you put kindling in the chimney starter. That's all until next week, thank goodness.
That'll be enough.
Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer.
I'm Steve Wilkes.
Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by our buddy Kelly Dotson down in Austin. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.
Happy brewing.